It was a crisp Monday morning on Fifth Avenue, where the sidewalks gleamed with luxury and ambition. The boutiques shimmered in the sunlight, Versace, Dior, Prada, each a glass shrine to wealth. Yellow cabs weaved through traffic with rhythmic urgency, and the scent of fresh roasted espresso spilled out from the chic cafes. Among the crowd glided Celeste Montgomery, 25, blonde, radiant, and sculpted in privilege. Her heels clicked confidently across the pavement, everything about her screaming refinement. Hermes scarf, cashmere coat, Chanel handbag slung effortlessly over her shoulder. She wasn't just rich, she was raised to be rich. Her father owned half the real estate south of Central Park, and her mother sat on the board of the Metropolitan Museum. Celeste had grown up knowing three things: beauty was power, money was protection, and the world belonged to those who walked like they owned it. As she strolled past the Tiffany's flagship store, her phone buzzed. "You're not wearing the blue scarf again, are you?" "That's so last winter," came Celine's teasing voice on speaker. Celeste smirked. "Says the girl who wore Louboutin flats to brunch." Talk about betrayal. They both laughed. Celeste was still laughing when she saw her. At the edge of the boutique window sat an elderly black woman, wrapped in a tattered brown coat. Her hands were gloved, but the fingers were worn through. She sat cross-legged on a flattened cardboard box, a tin can in front of her with just a few coins inside. Her face was lined, her hair gray and tucked under a crocheted cap. Her eyes, tired but piercing, rose to meet Celeste's with a kind of quiet dignity that unsettled her. The woman said nothing. She merely extended a hand, not in demand, but in a gentle, hopeful gesture. Celeste froze, disgust flickering in her eyes like a match. "Get your hand away from me," she snapped. The old woman didn't move. She simply held her gaze. Something in Celeste twisted, not in sympathy but in rage. How dare she? How dare she? How dare someone like her look at me like we're equals? And then it happened. A sharp, open-handed slap. Celeste's palm cracked against the woman's cheek. People gasped. Phones whipped out. A couple froze mid-step. A man across the street yelled, "Hey, what the hell is wrong with you?" The old woman said nothing. She didn't cry, didn't flinch. She merely blinked, slowly, as though swatting away the insult with her eyelids. Then she stood, spine straighter than anyone expected. By mid-afternoon, the video had already hit 10 million views. A stranger on the street had captured it all. The slow, deliberate gesture of the old woman's hand, the flash of fury on Celeste's face, the shocking slap that cracked through the city's polished silence like thunder. It spread like wildfire. On TikTok, Twitter, Reddit, hashtags exploded. "Has Slapgate, Fifth Ave shame?" "Whooshy." Celebrities chimed in. News anchors dissected it. Think pieces appeared within hours. But the worst part for Celeste wasn't the press. It was the comments. The public didn't just condemn her. They dissected her like a villain in a morality tale. Spoiled rich brat assaults elderly homeless woman. The Montgomery name was everywhere, and Celeste, once adored for her charity galas and influencer campaigns, was now radioactive. Her peer team tried to act fast. They crafted apologies, begged for interviews, offered donations to shelters. But none of it worked, because the woman in the video, silent, unshaken, profoundly dignified, had already won the court of public opinion, and yet she had vanished. Reporters swarmed the area, asking locals, store owners, cafe waiters, but the old woman, as if a ghost, was gone. What no one knew was that she had chosen to disappear. Her name was Evelyn Monroe, once a Wall Street legend, now a recluse by design, Decades ago, she'd built an empire in finance, specializing in turning bankrupt companies into billion-dollar giants. But after a betrayal by those closest to her, partners, friends, even her only son, she had walked away. She had liquidated her assets, vanished from public view, and given most of her fortune to anonymous charitable trusts. All except one account. A fund tucked away, quiet and untouched, like a final card in a poker game she no longer cared to play. Until that morning, Evelyn had walked those streets not in desperation, but in meditation, watching, measuring, seeing if the city she once helped build still had a soul. Celeste's slap wasn't just an insult. It was a spark, and Evelyn was done staying invisible. Meanwhile, Celeste sat in the penthouse she once considered a palace. The curtains drawn, the air tight with fear. Her parents had called 4 times, furious. Her modeling contracts were under review. Brands were pulling out. Even her so-called friends were ghosting her. But what haunted her most wasn't the loss of image. It was the woman's words, "You don't know who I am, child." "But you will." That voice kept echoing, like a thread tied to something deep and unraveling. Days passed. Celeste avoided the streets. But New York didn't forget. The incident was painted on walls, printed in signs, etched into memes. And then an invitation arrived, hand-delivered. No name. No RSVP. At exactly 7:59 p.m., Celeste stepped out of a black car and into the warm glow of the Beacon Room's grand entrance. Her nerves hidden behind a carefully chosen black dress that whispered elegance but humility. Her hands trembled slightly as she handed her coat to the attendant, scanning the room for any sign of Evelyn. The Beacon Room was legendary, not just for its 5-star cuisine or opulent chandeliers, but because it was rarely open to the public. Tonight, it had been reserved entirely for her. Every table was empty but one. In the center of the room, under a crystal light fixture that shimmered like stars, sat Evelyn Monroe. Gone were the ragged coat and knit cap. She wore a deep emerald gown, silk gloves, and a diamond brooch shaped like a crescent moon. Her hair was styled in waves of silver, her presence so commanding it made the room feel like a courtroom. Celeste approached slowly, each step feeling like penance. "You came," Evelyn said, her voice even, her eyes unreadable. Celeste nodded. "I needed to." Celeste nodded. It was final. Celeste obeyed. A waiter appeared with champagne, and Evelyn raised her glass. "To visibility," she said. Celeste didn't toast. She couldn't. "I'm sorry," she whispered. Evelyn set her glass down. "Tell me what you're sorry for." Celeste hesitated. "For hitting you. For treating you like you didn't matter." Evelyn tilted her head. "And why did you do that?" The silence stretched. Celeste swallowed. "Because I was raised to think people like me were better, and I didn't want to see you. Because seeing you meant seeing everything I've ignored. That's a start." Their meal arrived. Seared scallops, beet risotto, grilled asparagus, and they ate in silence. Halfway through, Evelyn said, "Do you know why I brought you here?" Celeste shook her head. "Because you need to understand the weight of your choices, not just for your sake, for everyone watching you. Your apology on a screen means nothing, but your transformation, if it's real, can mean something." Celeste looked down. "How do I even begin?" Evelyn leaned in, voice low and firm. "By stepping out of your shadow and into someone else's story. Tomorrow morning you'll come with me. No press, no entourage, just work. Real work." Celeste blinked. "Work?" Evelyn nodded. "You'll see." As the dinner ended, Evelyn stood, her poise unshakable. "The world gave you everything. Now you're going to earn something, starting at sunrise." Then she walked away, leaving Celeste alone in the echo of chandeliers, her reflection caught in the polished floor, no longer certain who she was looking at. At precisely 6:00 am, Celeste stood shivering on the edge of the Lower East Side, her designer coat replaced by a thrifted parka Evelyn had sent with a note. "Leave your name at home today." She wore no makeup, her blonde hair tied back simply, the kind of way she never let herself be seen, not by the cameras, not by her mirrors. Evelyn met her on the curb without greeting, motioned her to follow, and together they descended into a part of the city Celeste had only driven past in tinted windows. Their destination was a dim shelter tucked between two shuttered bodegas, where the scent of coffee mixed with bleach, and something unnameable. Inside, men and women lined up for breakfast, most of them weathered by hard nights, some muttering to themselves, others just staring ahead as if time was something they could no longer count on. Evelyn introduced her not as Celeste, but simply L.A., and gave her a tray. "You'll be serving oatmeal and eggs. Keep it moving, and listen more than you speak." Celeste's hands trembled as she ladled hot food into chipped bowls, avoiding the eyes of those who thanked her or looked through her. She had never stood this long. Her back ached, her palms burned, but something else began to settle in, a silence, not external but internal, where she no longer heard the hum of validation she'd once needed. After an hour, Evelyn brought her outside, where a young girl, no older than 10, sat curled in a blanket with her mother on the cold steps. Without a word, Celeste knelt and handed the girl her own gloves. The girl smiled, wide and missing teeth, and something cracked inside Celeste's chest. They moved on, to a school where Evelyn funded after-class reading programs, to a women's clinic Evelyn had helped build brick by brick, to a rooftop garden above a tenement where volunteers grew herbs for local kitchens. Every place Evelyn brought her wasn't just a stop. It was a story, a consequence, a redemption, and with each stop, Celeste shed a piece of herself she didn't know she was carrying. By sundown, her clothes were stained, her legs sore, her voice hoarse, but her eyes, for the first time in years, looked alive. Evelyn finally spoke as they watched the sun disappear behind the skyline. "What did you learn today?" Celeste didn't answer right away. When she did, her voice was raw. "That I've been asleep for most of my life, and waking up hurts, but it also feels real." Evelyn nodded, then handed her a simple paper folder. Inside were names, faces, handwritten notes. "These are people I've helped, people I've hurt, people who helped me become more than a balance sheet. Read them, more than a balance sheet. Read them." And just like that, the test had begun. Celeste spent the night reading every story in the folder Evelyn gave her. Some scribbled in shaky handwriting, others typed with the neatness of a librarian's touch. Each tale was a window into pain, perseverance, betrayal, and quiet triumph. Children orphaned by addiction, veterans rebuilding lives brick by brick, women who fled fire and fists only to light new fires of their own. By the time morning broke, her pillow was damp with tears, and her heart heavy with a truth she could no longer escape. She had lived so loudly in her own reflection that she had gone deaf to the world's quiet scream. The next day, Evelyn led her to a low-lit room inside a community center. In the center was a single chair, a microphone, and a small crew setting up a camera. "You're going to tell their stories," Evelyn said, "word for word, as if they were your own. Because in a way, they are now." Celeste's voice cracked on the first try. The second, she stumbled through her nerves. By the third, her tone steadied. Not perfect, but honest. One by one, she gave voice to those whose voices had long gone unheard. She told of a woman named Gloria, who hid bruises beneath her church gloves for 10 years before starting a shelter, of Marcus, a teenage boy who lost everything in a fire but found purpose planting tomatoes in a rooftop garden, of Mrs. Chu, a widow who taught ESL classes every weekend, though she spoke with a stutter herself. With each story, the camera rolled, but Celeste forgot it was there. Something else took over. Something else took over. And more powerful than glamour. Her words weren't filtered through branding. They weren't polished for clicks. They were raw, human, real. And when Evelyn watched from behind the camera, her expression didn't shift, but her hands. Her expression didn't shift, but her hands, usually clasped in control. When they finished, Evelyn said only, "You'll be back tomorrow." Celeste nodded, not because she was told to, but because she needed to. For the first time in her life, she felt useful, and somewhere beneath layers of privilege and protection, the woman she was always meant to become had begun to breathe. The next day began like the others, with purpose and simplicity, but ended with a revelation Celeste never saw coming. After filming 2 more stories and serving lunch at a housing co-op, Evelyn took her to an old church on the edge of Harlem, its brick walls ivy-covered and quiet. Inside, a modest group sat in a circle, some holding coffee, others holding back tears. "Grief group," Evelyn said. "You'll just listen." Celeste sat beside a woman whose face was lined with sorrow and whose hand shook when she spoke of her son, lost to a dose. Another man told of his brother, gunned down after being mistaken for someone else. But it was the final speaker that silenced the air entirely. Evelyn stood. Her voice, steady but heavy, filled the space. "My name is Evelyn Monroe. I lost my son not to death, but to ambition. Greed. He betrayed everything I built and everyone I loved. So I left. I disappeared. Not because I couldn't fight, but because I didn't want to become like them, until someone reminded me that silence can be just as cruel as cruelty itself." Celeste felt the world tilt. She had never heard Evelyn speak so openly, so vulnerably. After the meeting, they sat alone on the church steps, dust curling around them like smoke. "Your son," Celeste asked softly. "You miss him?" Evelyn looked out at the street, her eyes distant. "Every day. But pain, Celeste, is not permission to stop showing up for others." Then she reached into her coat and handed Celeste a photograph. One taken nearly 30 years ago. A young Evelyn smiled beside a boy no older than 10. "He lives in this city. You'll meet him one day." Celeste stared at the photo, then at the woman beside her. In that moment she realized Evelyn hadn't just given her guidance. She had handed her the blueprint to redemption, not just for herself, but for someone else. The slap had been loud. The meeting with Evelyn's son came sooner than Celeste expected. 2 days later, after filming another round of community stories, Evelyn handed her a slip of paper with an address scrawled in blocky, deliberate handwriting. "Vaughn," she said. "And be honest." The neighborhood was quiet, a far cry from the high-rises and glossy storefronts Celeste once haunted. She walked up the steps of a brownstone and rang the bell, heart hammering. The door opened to reveal a man in his 40s, tall and broad-shouldered, with eyes the same sharp gray as Evelyn's. He didn't smile. "You must be her project," he said flatly. Celeste swallowed hard. "I'm not here to fix anything. I'm just here to listen." He stepped aside, motioning her in without a word. The apartment was modest, but filled with books, photographs, and the faint scent of incense. Over tea he told his version of the story, how Evelyn's empire had swallowed everything, including their relationship, how ambition had turned her into someone he no longer recognized. "She chose the world," he said, "and I chose to disappear from hers." Celeste didn't defend Evelyn, nor did she try to justify what had happened. Instead, she told him what Evelyn had built in her absence. Quiet revolutions, whispered kindness, relentless work in the margins. She showed him the stories, the footage, even the photo Evelyn had given her. The man's face softened, not in forgiveness but in recognition. "She always said she wanted to be remembered for more than her wealth," he murmured. "Looks like she meant it." Before Celeste left, he handed her a letter sealed in an old envelope. "Give this to her. No promises." When Celeste delivered it the next morning, Evelyn said nothing. She simply held the letter against her chest and closed her eyes. No tears, just breath. A deep one, like someone learning to hope again. That night, Evelyn invited Celeste to dinner, not at a fine restaurant, but at a soup kitchen. They sat among volunteers and strangers, laughing over stew and bread. And in the middle of it all, Celeste realized something. This wasn't just her journey of atonement. It was Evelyn's too. Two women, bruised by different failures, finding redemption not in spectacle, but in service, in truth, and in the people they had once overlooked. Weeks passed. Celeste's videos, simple, soulful recordings of other people's stories, began to quietly ripple through the city. Not because they were viral, but because they were true. Her face, once plastered on fashion billboards, now appeared on flyers for food drives and reading campaigns. She no longer needed a stylist or a camera crew. She walked the same streets she once owned, not above the people but among them. One morning, as she handed out fresh bread at the shelter, a young girl tugged on her sleeve. "Are you the lady from the video about the garden?" Celeste smiled. "I am." The girl beamed. "I want to plant flowers too." And in that moment, Celeste understood something Evelyn had never needed to say aloud. Transformation isn't loud. It's not explosive or dramatic. It's quiet, rooted, patient. Like seeds breaking through hard soil, Evelyn, now less a mentor and more a partner, walked beside her in this new rhythm. The letter from her son remained unopened on her mantelpiece, not because she feared what was inside, but because sometimes just knowing a bridge still exists is enough for a heart to begin crossing. One evening, they sat in the park as the sun sank behind the skyline. Celeste watched children chase pigeons and lovers laugh on benches. "I used to think the world revolved around me," she said softly. "Now I think it turns best when I'm not at the center of it." Evelyn chuckled, low and warm. "That's when you know you're finally part of the world, not just watching it." They sat there a long time, two women who had once worn masks of wealth and survival, now breathing in something far rarer, peace. As night fell and the city's lights blinked on like stars below, Celeste closed her eyes and whispered, "Thank you," not just to Evelyn, but to the journey, to the pain, to the slap that shattered her reflection and showed her who she could become. This is not the end. It never is. Because every face in the crowd holds a story, and some stories, like this one, begin not in perfection, but in a mistake. If this touched your heart, stay with us. There are more stories to come, stories of change, of truth, of redemption. This was only one. See you in the next.